Jacob Kishere, and I am a co-founder of the Resonant Man. I'm here with my other co-founder, Matthew Green, and we have decided in the run-up to the launch of the Resonant Man, but also as an expression of our ongoing commitment to bring forth the fruit of our labor into the world and to try and bring more of a direct address to some of the needs of men and some of the conversations around masculinity and culture, that we're going to do these kind of shorter dialogues and just get into it a little bit about themes that are really current with us. So with that, Matthew, welcome to the podcast. And perhaps you just want to say a little bit about where we are with the run up to the Resonant Man, and then we can get into some of the meat.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thanks, Jacob. It's obviously great to have this chance to dialogue. And I'm still glowing from the 4 sessions that we held over summer, the gatherings we called the Resonant Man Summer Dialogues, 3 men's circles, and then the mixed circle that we held at the end. And that built a real energy that we're now channeling into a more regular community that will be meeting every Sunday, starting on November 10th. So we're in this moment where we're moving towards the launch and obviously welcoming men who feel the call, who want to explore the kinds of themes that we're about to launch into, to join our community and have an opportunity to really experience the work of the Resonant Man and the kind of the potency of what can happen when men gather in confidential spaces to witness each other and really provide that accountability and that connection that we obviously don't always manage to arrive at in the kind of usual course of affairs. So I'm really excited that we're about to get started with this at a deeper level.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, that invocation, not only of confidential, but like deeply intentional spaces, I think is key. That sense of a kind of directive energy that kind of gathers, like each man has his own purpose, but there's something about when a group of men gather together intentionally cohering around like the realization of their individual purpose and also to some extent a collective purpose. And so we're very carefully in the Resonant Man in a way like drawing out what are the deepest kind of currents, the kind of lifeblood of becoming a full, you know, embodied, spiritually awakened, responsive, directed man, and to kind of distill that into a space and an initiative, and to be able to go through that week by week, month by month, and be in this kind of like slow building orbit that kind of moves through each week. And of course, you know, the ups and downs of the week and life in between kind of feed into the space, but then the space also feeds out into the rest of the week. So that's a little bit of what we're about. And yeah, I think the prompt for today's dialogue was really an insight that came to me a few nights ago, actually, right before it was one of those right before going down to sleep, like lie down in bed and suddenly, like, I need to write this down kind of feeling. And it was about what young men need. Um, I had just had a big conversation with a traveler from Switzerland, a younger guy, and he was telling me all about TikTok trends and all of these like really disturbing trends that young people were getting caught up in on TikTok. Some of which were actually fatal, unfortunately, but it certainly detrimental. And it really got me thinking, like, there is this void, there is this vacuum of addressing the needs of young men in culture. And we're in a privileged position of having undergone our own sort of wisdom paths over the last few years of coming into our own manhood step by step. And a big piece of that, I think you realize at a certain point, is not only like, how do I come into who I am, looking up to these mentors, looking up to these elders, these role models. What's the kind of man that I want to be, or could I be? Through interacting and being met by these more fully realized men. But it's to turn also to the younger men and to realize, hey, there's a need here, and look back at your own experience and reflect on where, were you fucking really under equipped as a younger man. And I think most of us were. I certainly was. And so what I wanted to do here is just lay out some key pieces of what it is that young men need today, and to go through some of them. So we already primed a little bit before this about some of what we want to explore. I wonder if there's any of them that really call to you, Matthew, to pick up on first.
Yeah, that was a beautiful transmission that you sent with a number of themes. I mean, the first one that you spoke to was this widespread addiction and misuse of pornography and the energy drain that that is causing, and how little support or dialogue there is around that. It's obviously something that's very hidden, but it's a huge issue. And I mean, I'm 20 years older than you. When I was a teenager, we didn't have access to what young men have access to now. And it's obviously in the way you've described it before in that other video you made, it's a drain. It's robbing so many men of their energy, their creative force, even their capacity for greatness. And so having a space where that can be acknowledged, explored, and addressed, not in a judgmental way, but recognizing that there's something underneath this that needs to be looked at, I think is really, really important. But I think it's worth us also putting or bringing forward the other elements that you mentioned. It was that mentorship, this search for orientation, this guidance, and having healthy role models, but also having a space like we're creating in the Resonant Man, where we can actually meet one another, see one another, witness one another in our true experience in a way that just doesn't happen in a lot of male interactions. And simply creating that field is already a big step towards evoking something that I'm always trying to describe or write about or capture, but that you kind of know it when you feel it when men gather. There's something, I don't want to use the word tribal because that's not quite right, but there is something ancient. There's an older kind of template that starts to light up, that we're almost preloaded with, but we often aren't given the codes to kind of activate. But when we come together in this, as you say, intentional way, those codes suddenly start to turn. The kind of cosmic tumbler starts to unlock. And I loved what you said as well about this is about self-realization. In the context of a group, we don't, in my experience, flatten and become homogenized with the other men. It's the opposite. It's the group that supports us to become ourselves more authentically and more individually. And I think it's that dance between self-realization and the need for a group and mentorship and different generations to seed and support that, but also feeding back into the group and providing that in return to other men that then supports their becoming. So there's a whole load of things that can start to happen when we bring this intentional, or we start to relate to one another in this more intentional way. And as you say, there's a void that's just a kind of a mechanism or a magic even that can be really hard to find for men of all ages, actually, for young men in particular. But I think it's true of a lot of men of my generation. Maybe you have kids or young families. It's not easy to find spaces where we can be really real with each other, actually, in our struggles as well as in our deeply cherished aspirations.
And our victories for that matter, like be
Yeah,
able to share in the wins and to like have friends and brothers who like see you in your wins and are like, fuck yeah, dude, let's go. Like having some
yeah.
of that energy is very healing, I've discovered, and that's also something that a lot of men don't receive. There's just there can be a kind of a lack of that
That's so
potent
true, and
mutual encouragement.
yeah, and I think it's a skill that we learn. We learn to give each other that encouragement in ever more precise ways. And I'll give you an example. The other day, when I launched a workshop with a climate psychologist for people who are conflicted about their work life or their professional role, their role maybe in a big company that's part of the climate problem, you sent me a beautiful voice note that was short and brief, but really provided a kind of witnessing of what that meant to me, which was very important because people could say great or give me a like or give a kind of perfunctory acknowledgement that that sounds great. But having somebody go that extra level and really understand the meaning of it or the significance or at least what it's pointing towards as part of a bigger process, and to be able to do that just very precisely and concisely but impactfully is a skill we can learn, and it's something that as we give it to others we tend to find ourselves receiving it more. It's the
Yeah.
circularity, and especially in the group, that then starts to flow very easily and readily between the men, and there's a real energy that starts to build. And I will just underline something you said as well, like having that regular meeting on a Sunday provides this like island of coherence. It's a resource. It's like an oasis that we return to. And I have other groups that I meet in weekly that I really look forward to. I know that come say Thursday evening, I'm going to get really resourced. I'm going to be really seen, and I can bring whatever's been building in me, if there is something, and know that it will be there will be a kind of healing balm. There will be that the edges will be taken off whatever it is that I've been carrying, and it will be shared. The
Yeah.
burden of it will be shared, and knowing that that's coming around, like you say, in an orbit each week reliably is a really powerful resource that we can give to each other. And that's why we're not launching like a week long or a month long course or even a 2 month, 3 month course. We're doing this for the long term because we know that as we commit every week, that resource energizes and becomes more and more potent. And we also know that the work of healing and transformation isn't something that happens in 2 or 3 weeks. Yes, you can have a big breakthrough sometimes, but it's the consistent work together, it's the consistency and the application of these principles over time as a practice. In my
Yeah.
experience, that's when the shifts happen. This isn't a quick fix. Like, yes, you can have a breakthrough moment, but it's the integration, it's the long term commitment to yourself and the others in the group that really unlocks something that isn't available in a month or even 2, 3 months.
Yeah, very, very well put, and deeply resonates with my experience of this work and the journey so far. I think it's true of men's work. I think it's true of life in general. I guess just to add briefly to that sense of precise support that we receive from one another is like the way in which I was able to do that, I think, is through a deeper seeing. It's through really seeing not just the man where he is, but seeing the patterning of his life. And I remember we talked in the last podcast about sometimes you can kind of, when you get tapped into this resonance and this sensing, you can feel when a man is kind of on the cusp. Sometimes you can see a guy is in at the end of act 3 and he's coming into act 4, and there's a big change coming in act 4, and he might be kind of scrambling around like nothing's happening, or I don't know, or I think I should turn back and go to what it was before. But actually, you can kind of hold that wisdom of sensing, I don't know precisely what, but I can feel there's something here, and if I can just hold space, support it, that for me is kind of what an initiatory space can do. um and just to kind of like, I guess, go back to where we started here and like get into the meat of this a little more. um as you said, young men facing an absolute onslaught of parasitic programming, metaphorically, but literally, these are programs, these are digital tools which are hacking into native systems that have been around for millennia. Young men being horny has just been the reality of the way of life. It always was. But it wasn't always the case that they had access to an endless fount of super saturated, super dopaminergically stimulating, ever more extreme content of every possible variety. And that is just available like a heroin drip or something. The consequence of the porn culture, by which I mean the vast majority of all young men and boys starting to develop a porn addiction from age 14, 15, 16 onwards, and continuing that for years and years and years, is absolutely eroding men's sense of agency, because addiction always erodes agency. Whenever you create that dependency on something that is parasitizing you, in other words, it makes you think you're getting something good, but it's actually eating away at you. It's not giving you the thing it purports to. It's like a Big Mac, or
Yeah.
super addictive crisps. You can eat more and more and more, and you're never going to get what you wanted, because that deeper code is not there for you to masturbate to images of artificial scenarios with actors. That's just fucking up all of your circuitry.
Yeah.
You're designed to have a real meeting with another human being in all of their complexity, and to actually reach that place with a woman often actually demands something of you. It demands courage, it demands combing your hair, it demands cleaning up your act a little bit, it might demand you to show up with some degree of prowess, whether it's humor or athleticism or whatever it is. All of these things are importantly interconnected. And yeah, men of almost all ages today are literally spunking away their life force. And we don't think of it like that, but that's what it is. This
Mm.
is your seed energy. And
Mm.
and you're left depleted, less motivated, less likely to actually now go out and take a salsa class or do whatever it is you would have done with that kind of libidinal drive.
Yeah.
And
It's just draining away. Yeah.
those are the things
Yeah.
that make you as a man. It's like, get out there and participate. And I speak of that as someone who was thoroughly socially under-equipped and anxious and those kinds of things as a younger a boy and teenager. And so it's no small thing to even just start that one step out into the world. But we need voices who are affirming the kind of truth and good and beauty of starting on a path towards developing as a man. And we do that through, participation and overcoming of obstacles and these kinds of skills that get cultivated over time.
Yeah. And that's where that witnessing plays such a powerful role, because in the group we automatically or naturally begin to listen to those impulses in us towards participation, towards challenge, towards developing prowess or skills or some kind of way of projecting ourselves into the world. And that plays out for younger men in a maybe a slightly different way. But where I am in life, like middle-aged guy, I've got a daughter, married, it's still a very alive question for me. Like, I really crave the support of a group of men for my own actualization, even though the point of the spiral that I'm on may be very different from someone who's 20 years younger than me or even more. But when we come together, that generational difference can be really helpful, because my way of thinking about this question of like even meeting women or like relating with women, obviously I have a whole I have an experience of that is literally from a different era. And at the same time, I know that when I'm with you, like, I feel I'm the student a lot of the time, because you're dialed into things and to kind of a whole kind of scene or a whole set of ideas that I'm still just catching up with. So we have this exchange that as we grow the group and bring in people, we have guys who are older than me, we have younger guys than you joining. It creates this kind of weave that all of us draw nourishment from. It's not like one set of men is giving to another. It's this symbiotic kind of ecosystem that starts to develop, where all of this wisdom and experience becomes complementary, and a kind of collective intelligence starts to operate. And that's the other part of the work that I think we need, like men need. We need to be able to plug into these fields where, like, what I think of as collective intelligence begins to work. And how to describe what that is. It's a kind of orchestration that starts to develop when you start to hear exactly the thing that you needed to hear coming out of the mouth of one of the other guys, or one of them is struggling with an issue that you have some mastery with that you can then share or support them with, or vice versa. You hear someone articulate a struggle that really speaks to your own experience, and something happens that the whole becomes much greater than the sum of its parts. And being able to access that, to kind of plug into that mainframe on a regular basis, can be super accelerating for our own like personal process and our own personal quest to become more fully who we are actually. But it's also just like super encouraging. It's just like during the rest of the week, it's something to look forward to. There's always this kind of beacon pulsing out, this higher frequency energy that is always available, and always a current that we can ride towards the version of ourselves that we know is waiting. Not to say that, you know, we're not content with who and where we are, but we're also in a process. We know that we want to grow, develop, and bring more of ourselves out into the world.
Yeah, get out and do things and
yeah, I mean, that's a big part of it, isn't it? Like, and that's, I mean, you know, so much, especially in the culture in Britain, like so much of the culture among men has been trapped at a kind of superficial level, which isn't necessarily, and which can be a lot of fun. You know, it can be great to hang out and, you know, have a drink and engage in kind of banter, you know, at a superficial level. There's nothing wrong with doing that, but we have a hunger for something more, and it's not always obvious. There's not always a cultural route that we can follow to find that. Yes. We don't know when it's okay to want that, or we don't have a kind of vocabulary to ask for it, or it's just not, it's there, it's tantalizingly available somehow, but it's just somehow never quite within reach. I mean, that's certainly been my experience in the past. Um,
Yeah.
and it's amazing how quickly, when we create the kind of space we do in the Resonant Man, that we're in a totally different octave. We're relating to each other with a much greater depth and kind of care, actually, and sensitivity than we would if we were in our default mode that we're kind of required to occupy for a lot of what's in the culture. So we're stepping out of the culture to create our own culture around these kinds of values that then helps us to kind of return to the culture
Yep.
feeling much more empowered, much more able to meet people with precision and to represent ourselves with greater clarity, strength, courage, and you say participate. And that, there's no prescription of what that participation looks like. It would be very radically different for every man in the group, but there is something in that word participation that I think is powerful. That spirit that we will be engaging with our communities, with whatever domain calls to us, that we will be showing up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I, in the question of like what young men need, I think what you're really zoning in on and starting to bring words to is this lack of intergenerational fabric of a space of initiation that I sense has throughout history been there at various times. And it is that kind of stepping away. It is kind of like younger men with middle men, with elders who are sitting in their elder energy, going away and going into a space where a more profound process, a journey of self realization can occur. And when a man comes back from that into the community or into the culture, he's a little different. He's a little more fully realized in himself. And we today, like the culture that I grew up in Britain in the 90s and 2000s, was one completely bereft of that. It's not only that it wasn't there, it's that I didn't know that I was missing it.
You, you didn't even know that you didn't know that you didn't know it wasn't there. Yeah.
Yes. And so the message is this: young men, initiation is real, initiation is possible, initiation is here for you. When you are ready, when that call starts to resonate within you, you will find it. It will find you, whether it's through, relationships, through something like a men's space, whether it's through plant medicine and things like this. There is somewhere you can go to go deeper within yourself and realize some of the deeper resources and processes that are within you, so that when you come back to the quotidian life, when you come back to what am I going to do for a job, what am I going to do for bills, what's going on in my social life, that's not all there is. There's a deeper happening going
Mm.
on. There's a deeper happening. And you, in attending to that within yourself, are going to show up with something more
Yeah.
in your life, in your social circle. People are going to start to sense this change within you. And this is what we call kind of the dialogical universe. It's a responsive universe. And this is the other side of the coin to saying, young men, wisdom can be cultivated. There are great texts, there are wise men and women, there are spaces, there are practices, there are plants, there are processes that can help you to learn and realize what this life is at deeper and deeper levels. And that ladder goes almost to infinity. So, there's no top end to that ladder. And so, in realizing that too, it's about, okay, now I'm able to have more profound interactions with people around me, I'm able to be the one that opens the space in my family or in my social group where maybe previously it was all superficial and we could never get down to that stuff. I've now become that fountain. I've become the one that's bringing the roots in, and that's really important. And I think that can enable young men to see, like, you don't need to be Elon Musk. You don't need to be 30 years older than you are. You just need to realize what's important and what's true and good and beautiful and worth preserving and worth building and worth caring for around you, and start to do that. And when you do, things feel different and you start to grow with it. And your life is like can become a little garden that can start to grow things.
Yeah, it's bringing me in mind a phrase that I heard a teacher called Patrick Connor used recently, and he talks about an initiatic field. And we don't have like some kind of initiation rites or anything. It's not like that. But just being in a field, but being in a group, being in the field that develops between us week after week after week is a form of initiation, because it's opening up conversations or inquiry or new connections, new understandings of ourselves and how we relate to other men, what's really going on for us, what we're maybe not wanting to look at. Suddenly we start to get a glimpse of, we start to recognize the kind of patterns that are running parts of our lives without us necessarily realizing or having much consciousness around. That is a form of initiation. I mean, it's not quite like going to a plant medicine ceremony or going to war, which was the initiation that I sought as a young man. I was equally bereft of orientation. And for me, that I was following a very deeply ingrained collective pattern of seeking initiation through war, basically. And I wasn't a soldier, I was a journalist, but I had a very strong impulse to go to war. And I recognize in retrospect that that was this search for self-realization, for initiation. And actually, it didn't really work in the way that maybe I'd hoped. And so my kind of, I see I had far more important initiations than actually being in the conflict zone. But the impulse was there. And I'd also add, it is, yeah, I mean, everything you said and your sort of the way you spoke, you were speaking in a sense to young men, I think was beautifully stated. But I also think it's valid in a fractal scale for those of us who are older, for those of us who are in middle age or older, because it's easy at this time of life to start to question again, like, what is my purpose? Where am I going? What is the script I'm following? What am I growing in that garden? And especially if we've had decades more to grow, we may even have some anxiety around, like, what's the harvest actually going to look like ultimately? Like, have I grown enough? Have I grown the right things? And having a group, a place where we can go to sit with those questions and really take an inventory and really have a little bit of time to connect with what is really important, what really we do want to cultivate, how and recognize our agency in doing so, and also recognize what we want to let go of and what maybe we've been unconsciously feeding for too long. That's another form of initiation that I think is very potent for men who are not young men, but who are still very much engaged in the process of becoming, which obviously never ends. And having an initiation into that phase of life is certainly what leads me to this work as well. Why I know that working with you, co-facilitating with you as a younger man has a certain power for me at the time I'm in as well. It kind of reminds me of something about myself, which it's like I'm speaking to myself across generations, my younger self speaking to my older self, and vice versa. There's like this kind of multi-dimensional conversation I'm having, which is really enlivening because it's easy at this, especially at this age, it's easy to kind of get resigned to things. It's easy to give up on things. It's easy to, again, get sucked into a kind of cultural script that you're now in a kind of decline relative to, your 30s, 40s. So I really feel like there's something about the fact we're from different generations that creates the ground where we can really convene, and we did in the summer dialogues, we can really convene these kind of levels of men who can speak across these generational divides in a way that is enriching in both directions. And that's really exciting for me. Super exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. It adds so much richness and complexity to the whole space, to the whole field.
I mean,
And
let's face it, when I was when I was a lad, we didn't have Tinder, we didn't have like, I mean, when I was a teenager, we didn't have mobile phones. We actually had to call the girl's parents and ask to speak to them. It was terrifying. That was an initiation, right? I mean, and I was reading some stat the other day saying that, I think I sent it to you. It was like
yeah.
40% of young men have never approached a woman in real life, like in person. It's only ever been done via WhatsApp or whatever platform.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I thought, wow, like that's different. Like we had to go through that. I mean, you look back at it now and it all seems very quaint and, quite sweet in a way, but it was scary stuff to, take your potentially totally humiliate yourself.
Yes.
But it was the only way to win the prize. There was no other way to get across, to get to the other side. That was the only way.
Yes.
It was that or
And
nothing.
and I will say that that generation, your generation, like there's an immediacy of communication with that. Like you have to actually pick up the phone
Yeah.
and be ready to communicate. And
Yeah.
with this generation and generations afterwards, it is possible to coast along in this like super indirect
Yeah.
space of chat messages and instant messages and likes and stories and all of these little things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's kind of as far as I can tell, there's an explosion in casual relationships as kind of like a trend, and there's kind of a a guarding of hearts from men towards real commitment, and the ideal of like finding your queen,
Mm.
has been completely lost to a significant degree.
Mm.
And I would certainly benefit from more conversations around that. Even now I'm thinking those things through a lot with my peers, and collectively we are starting to like to uncover that wisdom, that finding that soul partner is one of the most important things we will ever do
Yeah.
in this life. And when we orient towards that as men, we can start to actually attend to our life as if we're building the kingdom. We're tending the soil, we're getting everything in place so that
Mm.
soulmate woman can enter. And also understanding that when we can make a commitment to something, to a place, to a woman, to a group of men, there's an ennobling and there's an enabling that occurs there
Mm.
that allows us to like, okay, we kind of even land more in our body, in our community. We become more of kind of a pillar
Mm.
as a man. And as you spoke to, like, man, there is quite a few men I know of in that sort of 40s and 50s age range who are lost.
Mm.
It's not just young men who are lost. It's
Mm.
young men who are lost, and their dads are also a little bit lost, and the
Mm.
dads don't even know how to speak to them because they themselves are a little bit lost, and they're just in this kind of like midlife haze milieu. They've done the things they were supposed to. They got the house, they got the mortgage, they had the kids, and now the kids are
Mm.
moving out, and it's like, well,
Mm.
where was this supposed to go, or what is this for? And where is that connection to the divine spark? Where is that connection to the real unfoldment of your soul in the world around you? And
Yeah,
again,
there's
men in that position, they need a space to go that breaks them out of that matrix of normalcy, which is often maintained by work relationships, the same mates that they've had for 30 years or whatever. Like, you need somewhere that takes you out of it
yeah,
in order to allow you to really get into it.
yeah, yeah. And what was coming up for me as you were speaking was remembering something that I've noticed about myself quite recently, which is how I'm going through this almost reprogramming or reorientation around recognizing that I was very much my search for myself was very much in work and career, and a story about what kind of career I would have or who I would be professionally, which I actually in some ways achieved quite early, and then realized that it wasn't quite the answer that I'd imagined when I was a teenager. And I'm really recognizing now how I'm seeing that my relationships are my wealth. Not to avoid hard questions about money and finance and building the kingdom, as you say, but suddenly noticing, wow, actually the richness of my relationships is so much more important than I would have ever have acknowledged or anyone ever told me, or if they did tell me, I wasn't paying attention. In fact, an early mentor of mine did tell me that, but I was too young to, I had to learn it. I had to figure it out for myself to really integrate it. But that that perspectival shift from being so preoccupied with my story of whether or not I'm successful and on what terms, which has been that's taken up a lot of my processing power over the decades. Suddenly to recognize, wow, there's this other level, and it feels much more expansive and much richer and much juicier and more interesting in many ways. But that only starts to happen when I directly correlate that with being in these kinds of spaces where I've been able to make form new relationships with people who almost are not necessarily my friends. Like, I'm friendly with them, but we're on this shared journey or shared endeavor of self-discovery, self-actualization, of developing the skills and capacities that we've been speaking about. And so, and these are people I've met in men's groups or in mixed groups, but there's having these connections and this shared commitment, these kind of like pilgrims almost, like we're on the same path. It's a special kind of fellowship that is different from friendships I may treasure from school or from work or from where I live. Like, yeah, these are really important, but this is a different kind of friendship. It's a different kind of meeting that I think we really well, speaking for myself, has been transformational in terms of my value system and what I think even a successful life looks like, and how impoverished I would feel if I didn't have those connections. I didn't have these fellow travelers who are all kind of walking the same mountain, walking up this mountain together. Like, and you used the word fellowship. You introduced that word to me or reintroduced it to me. It's a great word. It is like a fellowship. It's a certain, there's a quality of what of this field that we create together that is different from what is standardly available. And
Mm.
it's exciting to feel that we're reawakening our capacity to evoke that as men, We have that power. We have the power to evoke this field, this relational field that has this intelligence. We all have that as a birthright. It's just that we're not generally taught or reminded how to how to bring that forth, but we know how to do it. We've
Mm.
been working on learning and practicing this for years. And that's why I'm so confident inviting men into this space, because I know that they'll just feel the crackle and the spark, and it just happens. It starts to cook. Yeah.
Yeah, I really, really like how you laid that out. And I appreciate you also bringing like that is a kind of flowering as a fruit of your journey of decades coming through, which highlights all the more like the depth and significance of it, and how in many cases, we've been pointed in the wrong directions. We're
Yeah.
misdirected, or we are kind of famished. We are
Mm,
undernourished in knowing what is valuable, because we've never even had the spaces to ask the question. We've never
mm,
had the men in our lives with, the degree of presence and, wit and insight to be able to hold that conversation, to have that grandfather or whoever who sits by your side and talks through like
mm,
about life with you. And, I think very few of us really have that to the degree that we need it.
mm.
And when we begin to ask those questions, that's when a whole lot can open up. And just, really what I'm doing here is tying what you've said into the situation of the youth today again. Is like their value, what's important is being shaped by this media, these mediums of communication. And these mediums of communications have deeply parasitic
Yeah.
elements in them, which are not your friends, which are not working for the good, the true, and the beautiful, for your
Mm,
inner greatness. They're working to feed
mm,
the machine, so to
mm,
speak.
mm,
And so, my young nephews are talking about, everyone's talking about they want to be a YouTuber, they want to be an influencer, right? It's about
mm,
having influence, having views, having growth, making a big buzz. It's very phallic, for want
mm,
of a better word. It's about being a big, stick on the scene, but what is it towards? What is it
mm.
for?
Yeah.
What is it serving? What is the point of views ultimately?
Mm,
And it's because of the consequences of the journey I've been on that I can say, no, that's not the fundamental thing at all. It's not about having millions of views. It's about having relationships, conversations. It's about actually creating things that are coming through you.
yes, exactly.
That is the infinite wealth, as Jordan Bates, my our good friend and men's work facilitator has articulated so well. Um, this expanded notion of wealth is also a really big thing for
Yeah.
men, and to like realize, okay, there is the grind and there is making money and there is figuring out how to intelligently manage that and grow that. But then there is also the wealth of relations, the wealth of wisdom, the wealth of health. And all of those need to be dynamically feeding in on one another to become
Yeah.
the resonant
And
man.
exactly. And it's presence. It's being able to be present with ourselves. That, yeah, we can sit and practice meditation, or we can do our individual practice, and that's often super helpful and important. But there's a quality of presence that we can cultivate in a group space that has a unique flavor, unique quality, in my experience. And there's sometimes those moments in the group when everyone's just quiet. We're all sitting together, and there's just a moment where the silence is alive and you can feel the intelligence, but no one needs to say anything, because we're all dropping down together into a deeper level of awareness. And that, for me, is the essence of all of this work. How much of the time am I coming from the past? Am I in a loop? Am I in a conditioned response to the world? Am I thinking conditioned thoughts? Am I rehearsing my past in some way? Am I seeing the world and people and situations through filters, filters which are created by trauma of some kind, whether it was my individual trauma, my ancestors, the collectives that we're inhabiting? So much of the time, we're not seeing the world and each other and ourselves clearly. And the healing is to start to recognize that. And it can be painful to see that and how that has restricted and controlled us and been amplified by the technologies that you describe, for sure, which find their way into these cracks and fissures and kind of really kind of stick their hooks in. But in the group, we can cultivate that capacity to come back to now, to be in direct relationship with that deeper dimension of ourselves. Like we may call it even the vertical dimension. Like we start to recognize that there is a data stream, there is a communication, there is a trail that's being laid out for us all the time in every moment. If we can align with it and begin to flow with where the energy, the consciousness, that depth wants to take us. And that's exciting. It's exciting to live like that. It's much more exciting to live like that in that emergent, spontaneous way than it is to be burdened by the conditioned self. And as I'm speaking to you now, I feel it. I feel that glimmer. I feel the light. But I know that I can go through hours of my day not feeling that and feeling sorry for myself or feeling pissed off or frustrated or like I'm behind or all manner of stories about why things are not okay. Like I have an enormous capacity to veil myself in complaints and resistance. Like I know that. and yet, I also know that it's always there. It is always here. And yes, as I say, we can do plant medicines, we can do breath work. There's millions of practices that can remind us of that and even show us with undeniable, brilliant luminosity that that's the truth of our fundamental situation before it all closes back down again. But in the group space, we can really start to live that. We can feel it in a kind of, we can have our hands in the clay of it in a way. It's like got a more substantial, like that can sound very abstract, but in the group space, we just feel it. We just know it. We just experience it wordlessly sometimes. And, you know, you and I, we love to talk, we love to communicate, we love words, we love philosophy, we love metaphysical discussion, like, but sometimes there's none of that. We just feel something that I can't even articulate. But that's the medicine that I really ultimately I come for. And it's why we're talking and wanting to share it. Like why I'm surprised that I'm in a, I mean, I never would have imagined co-initiating a men's group a few years ago. I mean, we worked with Daniel before and, you know, I've done some others, but, you know, going back 4 or 5 years, I couldn't have imagined doing this. And it's exciting to sort of find myself wanting to make this available to other men. I want more men. I want every man to feel this, to have this experience, to have this opportunity. I just think it's our birthright. And as you say, it's kind of fallen through our fingers, but it's right here if we want it back.
Mm. Yeah, is that sense for me of like coming into the space and unpicking all of those parasitic stories. And
Yeah.
sometimes not even unpicking, sometimes just letting them dissolve into that felt experience that you're talking about, that healing presence. And then from that place, like if you come, if you practice, if you show up for this with commitment and consistency, you get to be that for
Yeah.
other people. You get to
Yes.
be the
Yeah.
one that brings that out, no matter how dysfunctional your employer, no matter how dysfunctional your parents, your family, your social whatever, you get to be the one that brings a little bit more, and you get to learn how to more precisely show up in those relationships in a way that like allows you to have more integrity and allows
Mm,
more truth to be present there, and
mm.
all of those things. And there's so much to learn, and goodness knows you and I are still learning along the way.
Yeah.
But what I hear from you is that coming into this Resonant Man and launching this is at the edge of your call,
Yeah.
and I feel at the edge of my call. And I think what we want, as much as for every man to tap into the wisdom of his own soul, is the men who, are at the edge of their call, or they can feel the call and they want to go a little bit closer to the edge of their
Yeah.
call, and they want to feel
Yeah.
what it's like to be at the edge of their calling. And that's,
Exactly. Yeah.
absolutely unique to them. And at the same time, it's something that we can kind of in this primordial way all sense together.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's like we form this like base receiver station where we get like when we link up together, we can download a higher fidelity signal about what's next, basically. That's what happens.
Yeah.
We're like transponder just receiving more light. So that's the metaphysical basis of what we're doing, if anyone was curious. But basically, yeah, I mean, when we sync up more, we each have more access to more. It's a very simple principle that we work with, and it's certainly on my edge of development. And I like you say, that's the kind of men we want, that we really welcome, are those who are wanting to find their edge, who are wanting to push forward, who are on the path and wanting to find fellow travelers and allies and companions, because they know there's more. They can sense it. They can sense it. There's more for them, but there's more for what they can bring to other people. And like, I'm really glad you brought that into it. It's not like we're just in some kind of solipsistic, ego-driven self-actualization obsession. It's not like self-optimization in some kind of late capitalist model. That isn't what we're talking about. It's like rewilding ourselves so that we can create healthy ecosystems around us, so that we can bring that drop of presence into our family system or the workplace or our community. Like, it's to become agents of the resonant man, essentially, so that we can bring
Agents of
some,
resonance,
yeah,
really.
agents
Yeah.
of resonance. Yeah, so we can bring this relational quality into all of our interactions, and that's like lighting little flames, and it starts to get passed on. So we want this. We're not just here for ourselves. We're here in service to something much bigger that wants to be felt and seen and experienced in our midst, it feels to me. And there's a there is an element of service in that. Like, we spend a lot of time working on this, and we do it because we love doing it. But there's an element of like, yeah, this needs to happen. This space needs to be available. It wants to be available. There's a reason for that that's beyond. Of course, it includes our own becoming, but it's much more than that. And what that looks like, we don't have a plan or checklist or agenda for what that is concretely, but we know the energy that we feel, and we want more people to have that opportunity, to have that sensation, that feeling of, yeah, we're in alignment now, like we're really here to contribute.
Beautiful, beautiful words. I think a great place for us to round out. Um, so much gratitude for this conversation. I feel just very lucid, and I feel we've covered a lot of terrain, but somehow all of it has had a very clear through line. Um, I think what I want to do now, just to close, also is to speak directly to the logistics of anyone listening. Like, how can they join? What does it look like? Um, The Resonant Man is currently running through the Resonant Man Substack publication. So you can go onto there, and we'll link that in the description. On there, you can find out about all of the themes that we're going to be exploring over the coming months and year. They're very, very rich. So I thoroughly encourage, even if you're on the fence, to have a look and see what resonates for you there. And and then you're very welcome to reach out to Matthew and I, if you have questions, if you'd like to have a chat about maybe exploring participating in
Yeah.
this, what what it's like, how it fits and vibes with you. We're very happy to do that. And then we're basically offering a monthly participation. We're really asking men to commit for the first 3 months. So starting in November 10th, that's going to be like a mini arc going through the winter months, especially for those of us who are going to be in Europe and the global north. It's going to be through the winter. And so we really want this to be like a vessel and a carrier and a journey that is going to kind of consistently help to direct us through those long winter nights. And
The time of rebirth, renewal. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah. It's a good
yes,
time. It's a good
historically,
time. It's a good time to step into this field because it's like in the
the
north.
fire that it's the fire we gather around in the
Yeah,
winter night.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, and we're kind of going down, and we're resting, and then we're ready to emerge as spring starts to come. But we're going to be moving forward, much more resourced and connected for that moment of opening. Yeah.
yes. Yes, and the cost of monthly participation, which includes a 90-minute session, which is guided end to beginning. We put a lot of thought and intention into each one. That happens every week, so you get 4 sessions every month. You also get a devoted Telegram group to kind of integrate reflections. How is this landing in your day to day? What challenges are coming up? Things like that. Resources, podcasts. Um, maybe music, rap music that I'm creating. I'll probably drop some of that in there too. All kinds of things are going to be flowing through that Resonant Man chat, but that's going to be an important resource as well. And the charge is £125 a month. We've actually worked quite a lot to bring that down to the most kind of affordable and accessible we could, whilst being consistent with the value. But obviously, if there's someone who's really, really deeply resonating with this and is unable to meet that cost, we're very happy to have a conversation as well. So, not much more to say there, Matthew. I think
Yeah,
we've rounded
emphasizing
out.
that I love your invitation that if we're in the we're putting this together and we're looking for people who resonate, men who really feel like there's something here, and would love to set up individual calls or further interaction if you want to dig a little deeper before committing. That's we very much welcome that. I think that's important to find the men who are really going to make the most and receive the most from this work. So please do reach out to either of us if you want to
Yeah,
have a chat.
yeah, absolutely. There's no interest in foisting anyone into
Yeah.
this. What we're interested in is meeting people where they are and seeing what's really aligned with them and for them. And so in a way, like the process is that dialogue. It's finding out, where are we and what are we moving towards? And if it's a good fit, great. Welcome on board, and we look forward to journeying with you. And if it's not a good fit, great, blessings on
Yeah.
the journey. And if you want to stay tuned with what we're creating and what flows out of this, you'll still be able to do that. We'll still be publishing and having more conversations, so you can stay tuned with the Resonant Man initiative over the next year as well. Great. Should we wrap it there, Matthew?
Yeah. Brilliant. I thought that was I enjoyed that a lot. I felt we were hitting our notes.